Look at that. All right, everybody. Thank you, Mr. McKenzie, for joining us today and talking about inclusive design and accessibility in software and game development. So, it's been great to have, speakers over Zoom, but to be able to have, someone in town speak to us about video games, which I know everybody loves to play, and everyone here has some computer science, interest, and in some ways a lot of advanced skills already, or even new skills. It's really great to have such a nice person with knowledge to come and join us here. All right, so thank you, Mr. McKenzie, and take it away.
Sure, and thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. And as I'm looking at all of your work just coming into the room, it's clear that you guys are like more experts than me in a lot of these areas. You're doing great work. So if there's a concept that we're going to go over that you guys have already heard, let me know and we'll just skip it. We'll move ahead. I'm going to talk about inclusive design both in software development and game development specifically, which is where I work. I am Brian McKenzie. Nice to meet you all. I'm a vice president of technology for Private Vision, which is a sub-label of Take-Two Interactive. I've spent 8 years in the gaming industry, and if you've played any of these games that are shown on here, I've contributed some aspect of technical, support to those titles directly, and more. I've, supported a lot of, business functions and teams that have, supported the last 8 years really of Take-Two's catalog of different games. Take-Two itself, these are all of our labels. So if you've ever played a game that is by any of these companies, that's my company. That's who I work for. We're about 7,000 full-time employees globally, and I do mean globally, all the way into India and China, Spain, California, as far as that is. And we make about 3.5 billion in annual revenue. The gaming industry is incredibly expansive and growing. A lot of this growth in employee, base has been really in the past 3 years. We've probably doubled in size in that time. I work for Private Vision specifically. I've worked for everyone, but I work in Private Vision now, really leading technology overall for the label. Private Vision differentiates itself from Rockstar and 2K, which are other big labels in the sense that we focus on what we call AAA games or indie games, games that are not, really, $500 million budget games. We're talking about, $30 million budgets, or, I guess, thinking about like what would be in the market, something like Outer Worlds is one of our games. Ollie Ollie World is one of our games. These are smaller titles, smaller scope, smaller teams, with a vision they want to bring to market, and we help support that. Kerbal Space Program as well. If you guys are all makers, so I'm sure you've played, that. That's one of our titles and one of the teams that I support directly. There's a lot of different areas of game design. When we talk about like gaming as a business, it's all of these things. It's not just, I'm going to code the game in Unity, or I'm going to code the game in Unreal, or I'm going to design the game. It's, aspects of finance and legal and QA, animation. There's a bunch of different disciplines, really the standard business disciplines, plus more, that really make up, the expansive sort of footprint of the gaming company. The areas that I work in specifically are boxed in red, mostly on the IT side, data, some aspects of research for our mergers and acquisitions, software development. I sit on the management team, and then game production. I help decide what games we produce and help advise, the technical teams, in the companies that we support on the best way to implement their technology. But if you want to do any of those things, you can still work in a game company. You don't need to just, make games. Traditionally, I'm sure you guys have covered this. If you're developing just a normal application, you would go through the software development lifecycle, which is a sort of set of stages that you would go through as you're ideating and sort of releasing a product, a software product to market, starting really with requirements gathering, interviewing stakeholders, asking what they want, writing down, the types of things that maybe make up the core concepts of the software that you're going to create, then going down into design, development, doing a testing loop, and then deploying that and maintaining it, really just looping through this cycle over and over and over again. And a lot of these concepts still stand true in game development, but we're a little bit different in the sense that, the requirements may be mechanics of the game. And we don't really have stakeholders we can interview. We don't go out to market and say, hey, what kind of, game do you want me to make, or how do you optimize, this aspect of the game? We do some aspects of testing to help inform that, but at that point, we're well into this loop. So when we think about how to be inclusive from a gaming perspective, we're looking at more principles from inclusive design generally. And this is really, learning from people with a range of perspectives. It doesn't mean that we're making one thing for everyone. We're designing with a diversity of ways for people to participate in the gaming experience, with a sense of belonging, meaning that it's meant for them to be there. They feel like included. They're not an add-on to the experience. And really understanding why and how people are excluded helps us design inclusively. Down here are some examples of, some exclusions, things that you would expect. Maybe somebody who's born with one arm, all the way down to a new parent who is using one arm because they're holding their baby with the other, right? This is the same design. You're still designing for one arm. There's multiple applications of that. And accessibility itself is an attribute of inclusive design, because as you can see, with the parent example, that's a temporary disability perhaps, or a temporary state. You're making an accessibility choice, as an aspect of being inclusive in your design. 1 in 4 Americans live with a disability, according to the CDC. That's probably a lot larger than you would expect on the surface, and that's because a lot of people have preconceived notions of what a disability looks like. Really physical, mental, neurological conditions that limit a person's movements, senses, or activities may be invisible to others. And, really only 39% of people choose to disclose their disability in a work environment, meaning that the majority of people don't disclose their disability. And of those people, only 13% of them have a disability you can see. So that's a very small segment, of people that are disabled, I guess, that you would assume that you're designing for. In inclusive design, an initial step would be to recognize areas of exclusion. So we say that disability happens at the points of intersection between a person and society. So it's like a mismatched interaction. And as designers, it's our responsibility to know how to really affect these interactions and deal with those mismatches. Like I mentioned, sometimes exclusion is permanent, like blindness. Sometimes exclusion is temporary, like an injury, and maybe they hurt their eye. Sometimes exclusion is situational. You're in a loud crowd, you can't hear. There's an aspect of hard of hearing or deafness there. These are all mismatched sort of interactions with your software or your product, that you could design for. Here's some examples of those mismatched interactions between humans. Can't type, can't hear. Those two people, how do they communicate with each other? That's something to consider. Even things like cold environment, glare from the sun on a screen. These create a situation of maybe temporal disability or interaction issue. And left-handed user, narrow door, tall shelf. These are all in product design sort of aspects that if you're a short person with a tall shelf, that is effectively a disability that you could design for. When we're designing a product, we might want to think about how can we create, how can we improve, how can we enable based on a variety of different experiences that we can, think about. Humans are really experts at adapting to diversity. So when experiences don't serve people the way that they should, people figure out a way to get around that. Really, we have to sort of adopt a hacker mindset and think about all of the possibilities in any given situation during our design phase. So think about the physical context of the use of the product, social context, how people are interacting with that, the time of day, how does this change aspects of your design? If somebody with a more core disability is interacting with your design, how would you change based off of that? any insights we have, will help inform sort of a more inclusive design. And then the final principle really of inclusive design is that we're solving once, but extending to many different people. Inclusive design works across the spectrum of related abilities, really connecting different people in similar circumstances. So the example on the left is showing a person who's hard of hearing. Closed captioning was created for the hard of hearing community, but there are other benefits for closed caption and implementing that in other places, such as reading airport, displays, where maybe a loud environment, you really can't hear what's going on, or teaching a child to read, extending that to children maybe who, need that extra support, maybe in an audio or sort of, visual medium. And to the right, really, this is just showing that if we're really doing design inclusively, we're expanding the market with the features that we're developing to be inclusive, expanding the market of usability for the products, maybe beyond what we initially thought. So in this example, a permanently one-armed person, represents about 26,000 people. These are just made up numbers. Somebody who injured their arm maybe is 13 million people. Somebody who is a new parent using only one arm with that application, 8 million people. You're reaching a total of 21 million people with your design for inclusiveness. It's just a broader audience. So it's worth your time to consider those types of, aspects.
If we use their style.
Really, this is called the persona spectrum. We're understanding related mismatches across different areas. And like I said in the last example, this is a tool to sort of foster empathy and sort of show how designs can scale across permanent, temporary, and then situational sort of disability situations. Like here, a deaf person, a person with an ear infection, and then a bartender in a crowded environment may all, want to interact with an application the same way, based on the situation that they're in. And you can see other examples here. So being inclusive really starts with changing our perception of what inclusivity is. It's not necessarily designing for disabled. It's designing so everyone can interact, with the product that you're creating. Now that's just, core sort of software design. Now we talk about, game development specifically. And games are, a very visual and, tactile medium. So it's a little bit different. We sort of extend what we know from inclusive design into this paradigm called the Apex triangle, accessible player experiences. Really starting at the base with access, moving to challenge, and then Apex is where we're trying to reach. That means it's a fully inclusive experience. The base level is just people are able to see what's going on, or not see, but interact with the game. Both from an output, they can understand what the game is doing, and an input perspective. We provided a controller maybe that's accessible, or a control scheme that's accessible. This is just the initial step. I mean, this is what most people think about, when they think of inclusive game design, like the Xbox gaming controllers that are designed to allow multiple inputs, or using a keyboard and mouse versus a game controller. But really, moving up, challenge is also a big part of it. Designing the game in such a way that the challenges aren't overwhelming for people. Is the enemy too fast? Is the puzzle too hard? Is the content too intense for the audience that you're trying to reach? Like, you've given them the ability to interact with the game. That doesn't mean that it's a fun experience for them. Doesn't mean that they can still actually play the game. So you have to consider, the design and sort of configuration of the game itself within that context. And with both of those things addressed, a designer has made a fully inclusive experience, and that's what we are shooting for. And it doesn't mean that we're making something for everyone. That's impossible. We can never reach everyone. And frankly, not everybody wants to play the game that we're creating. So we're trying to reach the broadest audience possible with the most reasonable sort of customizations that we can make. Here's an example, sort of showing moving beyond the accessibility into challenge. This person obviously is using an accessible controller scheme. They're in a wheelchair. They're playing the game, so they've already accessed, right? Their barrier, though, is that during an intense battle of a game, the player has to repeatedly hit multiple input buttons. They have to just hit a lot of buttons. And then long button holds are required to regenerate health. This is really difficult for them to do based on their disability, even with like an accessible control scheme. So how do we solve that? We implement facilitators. We provide this player the option to decrease the game speed, perhaps, or disable QuickTime events, simplify the control scheme for them, make it customizable, really just giving more options in configuration for them to make sure that they can be included in the experience and enjoy the game, which is ultimately the goal. Barriers and facilitators, extended from inclusive design principles, are really across all areas of accessibility. Here's an example, providing alternative player-to-player communication options for verbal chat, including text-based or text-to-speech support. It's not just serving people who cannot participate because they can't speak or hear. It's also servicing me as a parent who has a baby at home who wants to game in a quiet environment. It's servicing, players who are nonverbal by choice, and they don't want to, speak. I'm sure some of you game like that as well. Sometimes you just want to use emojis, or something. You don't want to actually, participate in the game. So your design element and your consideration for inclusiveness is reaching a broader audience, I guess, with the features that you're choosing to spend time on developing. Some other examples in different disciplines. On-screen objects in the game inform the player that they must travel to Snow Street to purchase firewood for their camp. The representation of this information, like the objective text, like setting up camp, purchase firewood, or the directional markers, shown here, or enemy character, sort of prompts. They may, be difficult for people who have issues with sight to understand. Like they're not able to interact with the game fully. They're playing it, but are they really playing it? They can't really understand, in a way that allows them to fully experience the game. So how can we facilitate that? We can ensure that on-screen objectives and sort of in-game text are announced via narration. You may have played a game that has an example of this. I think Minecraft has a mode that does this, where it says like, turning right, or, tree ahead, allowing, sort of audio to prompt what would be visually accessible normally as an option for them would be a way to sort of close the gap and allow this person to play the game. In this example, the game supports spatial audio output. For this player who is deaf in the right ear and wears a hearing aid in the other, game sounds are being channeled to his right speaker, and he's missing them. Like he literally can't hear the things in the right speaker. Additional multiple sounds are occurring, including weapons firing, explosions, and it's coming through maybe his hearing aid in a jumble, and he's just missing actual cues to take action in the game. So how do we design around that? We allow the player to adjust the audio input from stereo to mono, which means that all of the sounds come out one channel. They are really both channels, but it's the same. There's no right and left speaker. It's coming out of both speakers at once. And we allow him to adjust, different aspects of the audio, like the player chat volume, so that he can hear that more, maybe over other elements that are, happening at the same time in the game. And this allows him to have a good experience in playing the game. And one more example, while playing the game that contains bright, busy user interfaces, this player with sensory processing disorders finds the visual stimuli, everything happening on the screen, to be overwhelming. They just can't really process based off of their disability, what's happening or how to interact with that experience. This interferes with their ability to play the game that he really enjoys, and it's difficult to focus on. How do we design against that? We create a no noise mode, which eliminates a lot of the background elements and animations, maybe mutes the gameplay music or the background music, so that it's more of a direct experience on, what needs to be interacted with. Yep.
That's me.
Okay.
I didn't know that mode existed, but now I actually may play one through the games that my company likes to play.
Oh.
I cannot stand some of the games because it can't.
Yeah, too visually overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And
All right.
so this is how we would design, yeah, again, for inclusiveness, that mode has reached Mr. Matty, which is great. Here's an example. We can also contract with, different people to provide like overall sort of design recommendations for inclusivity. I included this example of a real life sort of contract project that we did for one of our titles, Ollie Ollie World, which Quinn has been playing a lot lately. But the two recommendations I have here are, many obstacles are hard to differentiate from the skatable path. This is a skateboarding game. If the person is colorblind. And so they recommended to us, like, we should change the color scheme or allow more customizations there. Down here, these icons are, unclear for low vision players. So this is feedback that, yeah, and you can't even really see it. I see you straining. They're like little check marks. And that's exactly the point. It's like difficult even for me to see. And so we would take this feedback and we would adjust aspects of the game based off of that. But of course, inclusion overall is multifaceted. We're not just talking about disabilities. We have to think more broadly about inclusive design and accessibility, down to supporting different beliefs, different, age ranges, criminal backgrounds, physical abilities, mental health, citizenship, seniority, neurodiversity, right? How do we address things like this? I mean, that's a lot. There's a lot to do there. But I think, some ways that I noted here are maybe broader character customization options. If you include things like cultural options for clothing, or avoid gender locking, the ability for a dress to be placed on a male, a traditionally male character and identified as a male character. Having options for, multiple gender identities, sort of non-binary sort of avatars. These are ways that we can provide inclusivity in the experience that wouldn't be necessarily viewed as a traditional disability. Also, just having diverse content creators, stories, characters, situations, getting as many people as possible that are interested in game design and development, into the craft, so that we can hear their stories. That all helps provide, sort of different experiences and inclusive experiences. Here's an example of something Microsoft has done recently, which is sort of changed their guidelines to focus on mental health inclusivity. We worked with this company, Obsidian Entertainment. They did Outer Worlds for us, which is a great game. Their follow-up to that was a game called Grounded. And what they recognized was that the concept of that game is that you're shrunk down like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids in like a really little backyard, and you have to sort of survive. I don't know if any of you played it. It's pretty cool. But like you're really shrunk down, so things like ants and spiders and other creatures are really large. And there's a really core section of people that have arachnophobia. They're really afraid of spiders. So they did a testing loop to try and be inclusive to that group of people, and came up with an arachnophobia mode where players could alter the appearance and audio sort of output of the spiders so that they look like this, and then sort of non-threatening ways. So this didn't inhibit a person with arachnophobia's ability to enjoy the game experience just because they, really couldn't handle spiders. So that's an example maybe of thinking more broadly about inclusivity. And that's what I have. I have this picture of Quinn back here with the Big Daddy statue when she was a lot littler when we were out in 2K Novato. This is from BioShock, if any of you played that. If you haven't, it's a great game. And I'll send this to Mr. Matty, who can share it with you. A bunch of other resources I included. Minecraft Education Edition offers a module called Buildability, and it's specifically designed to allow you as a player to solve challenges for people with different disabilities. And so they create experiences for you, challenges for you to interact with, to like help you learn about being more inclusive and in accessible design. I gave a few recommendations, slide recommendations, because I know you guys are designing mostly for people who are hard of sight or hard of hearing. just how you would solve with barriers and sort of facilitators, a bunch of those different situations. I won't read through them now. There's a lot of them here. Color blindness, situational, temporary vision, hearing. You can look through those. And then this is a link to a general spreadsheet just for game and software design that goes through sort of basic, intermediary, and like difficult, recommendations for how you can make your design a little bit more accessible. You can say, is this relevant to, the game, or do I have had this implemented? And you can link out to sort of a more broad definition of like what specifically needs to change to allow you to facilitate those recommendations. And then finally, I don't know if any of you do web design, but you can also design for the web inclusively. There's a spec on it. The W3C writes like core standards for web development, and so this one specifically is their accessibility guidelines, which will give you a lot of recommendations on how to do web design for teletype readers or things that would maybe allow your website to be more broadly used. That's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have on this content, or just like being in the game industry, or just anything else that you're interested in talking about.
That was awesome. I know I have a lot of questions. Yeah, wow. I don't know. Anyone have questions over here before I ask questions? Kieran, staff, do you have questions for Mr. McKenzie? I take one picture. I have to take some pictures.
Games yourself.
Yeah, I have been gaming for my entire life. Really, since I got an NES, like a Nintendo Entertainment System, when I was like 5. But I didn't always work in the gaming industry. Like this, I've worked in the gaming industry for like really 8 years. I did a lot of work with startups and more traditional finance companies that exist in New York before that. But I'm a core gamer, so I wanted to be in the industry, and I found a way to do that. Some of my favorite games, I love Legend of Zelda series. That's my favorite. Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, love them. But like more recent games, I'd say, Last of Us, both 1 and 2 are amazing. I really enjoyed those. I'm looking forward to the new God of War. I think it comes out like Tuesday. So I'll definitely be playing that. But it's harder now. I don't have as much time.
You need to make it accessible for you to play.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
In terms of like accessibility, what are some projects that you've worked on?
Sure. So, the Ollie Ollie World example is one example. We try and be as inclusive as possible in our titles, but really a lot of it is just defining like a set of principles our developers can use. And it has to really mesh with the gameplay, ultimately. We can't, like I said earlier, just check the boxes of, hey, this is a fully inclusive. That's just not going to happen. It's, is this relevant to the game mechanic that we're trying to define? So Ollie Ollie World is a good example. We contracted with a company called Able Gamers to do, that analysis, and then work with the developers to implement some of those features. But we've done similar analysis for Outer Worlds and for, we did it for Hades. What else did we do it for? Just integration, we did it for. So really all of our projects, we try and do that.
So do you work more on like the designing part of it, or just like the background of it?
Me specifically? So I more provide the guidelines to the developers and then make sure that they get it.
I have a question. So this is phenomenal to me. I wasn't expecting to learn about all the accessibility guidelines and thought you put into the games. I'm not a super gamer. I like games, but I don't know. And so I'm really very impressed. But for all our young, aspiring computer science majors even, is this something that you find developers are coming to in your group with this type of experience of understanding, kind of like, okay, we're going to design with inclusivity to start the game and not be an add-on? Or is this something that they kind of learn on the job? Where along, I guess, you're juniors and seniors now, but where, I guess, they're going to be into computer science and they get CS1 and CS2. How would you broaden your perspective of being a student
Yeah, I mean, so there's a bunch of things there. I would say, just understanding the principles of inclusive design early and trying to implement them in your design processes, regardless of whether that's like an intro to comp sci class or, this work they're doing here, it'll help build that foundation. But traditionally, I think especially in games, it just hasn't really been something that's broadly known. This is still an emerging field. It's funny, I had some slides on this and I didn't include them. But if you think about it, closed caption didn't even come to be until like 1979. So, we didn't make that a law to require closed captions on television. And then you think of video games adaptations of that. Really only the last 10 years, we're trying to be more inclusive and more accessible. So it's an emerging field.
Will?
Do you get discounts on the games that you worked on? Or?
I get free games now.
Oh.
Yeah, but then, if I want to buy extras for people who I know, I can get discounts on that. Oftentimes I play them before they're released as well.
I did think that one day we
I get your contact information.
Sure, yeah, I actually brought my business cards. You guys are all welcome to them.
Share the game with me before it comes out.
Yeah, maybe we do testing, so sometimes we need feedback.
maybe we have a makerspace video game test night. I would like to have, now that we have a nice big TV, it would be probably a good idea to bring down an Xbox or something.
And testing, like QA testing is really a core way that people come into the gaming industry from all different disciplines. They say, I like to play games, therefore I want to play games for a living. And so we have a facility out in Las Vegas, which has about 200 people who are just staffed to play games all day and just find bugs, and that's their job. You have to be careful what you wish for there, because playing the same game every day for 8 hours a day, cannot always be fun. It can be, a struggle. But it helps propel them, to other areas. They get to learn about design and they get to interact with the developers, and it's more of a gateway to other areas for a lot of them.
Do you watch the Ryan Reynolds movie about the gaming thing?
Do I what?
Do you watch the Ryan Reynolds movie about the gaming thing?
I haven't seen that. I saw it, I saw of it, but I haven't watched it. Yeah. Is that what he does? He's a tester?
I think like he's getting the people he's in a game there's people testing him. So I don't know.
Oh, people testing him?
Oh,
Yeah.
I saw that one.
Yep.
What about how, I guess in terms of the whole design process, you have the Xbox and Nintendo and so many different gaming systems, then obviously online, and how is that kind of part of the process? Is that just kind of some call it an add-on? How does that fit in with your programming for so many different kind of ways to interact with systems?
Yeah, so usually when it's separated into different product disciplines. So things like the online features, where I personally spend a lot of my time, like multiplayer design, implementing back-end servers, you're interacting with identity services, leaderboards. These are all things that me and my team support directly. And so we're more designing that product as one part of the whole product, right? And so if you're designing the whole game, we've released managers that'll work with Xbox and Sony and Nintendo on their requirements to release, and that'll be their job to make sure that we can release the products on those platforms.
Sav or Kieran, do you have any questions? You're interested in computer science.
No questions here.
All right. Any other questions here? Oh, Will, one more question.
Have you played or seen any of GTA 6?
Have I played or seen any of GTA? Well, yes, we've all seen GTA 6 because it released recently, right? And the big hack, that was a big deal for our company.
That's true.
Yeah, but yes, it exists. There's obviously, I haven't played it personally, but yeah, it exists. I've seen it.
It's going to release soon.
I think the hack's going to affect it. We'll see. It's unfortunate, but now I think the designers have to go back to the drawing board to make sure that they're creating new experiences, that aren't expected. So, yeah, I'd say, in the next couple of years, that's the goal for sure. But game design is a long process too. Like that game, geez, maybe it's like already 10 years in development. Some people, just work on one game for their entire career in gaming, depending on the
That is
size.
a really good way to kind of finish off that. We obviously have a certain amount of time, we're trying to get through prototypes, but especially for the video games that we're working on, that, especially if you're one or two people, they take time.
Yes.
Um,
Our normal cycle for indie games is two to 4 years. Probably $20 to $60 million with a team of, 10 to 70 people, depending on the size of the game.
That's why I think when we were discussing like the platformer game, that, just getting one kind of scene right,
Yes.
I think is a big deal, because ultimately you just need more time to make more of it, but getting that scene right with the different cues, audio, narration. Narration is interesting, we can talk about that, but narration might be something.
Yeah, just don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Just get it done, move on, make sure the game starts to form, and then go back and sort of optimize if you have time.
And that's a great way, oh, sorry, did you ask?
Oh, no, I was just gonna ask about like different kinds of software you recommend for beginners or just.
Sure, like for game design specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it depends what you want to do, but I think Unity
Oh, yeah.
engine is really accessible. They have a lot of like textures in the Unity asset store and extra modules that help, really, get things bootstrapped, I'd say. Plus, I think it helps you learn a little bit more about C# development. So learning about C# will really help you in game design go a little bit further than just the Unity UI. Unreal is great as well. You can use both. You can work on both for free. You just can't release a product for free on both. And Unreal's backend is C++. So at a certain point, they're both C language based, so you can sort of like flex between them. But yeah, they are different. So our smaller studios generally gravitate towards Unity because it's easier for smaller scope projects to do that work in Unity.
One more question?
So did you gain your experience in like coding through like college or like if you have a degree or?
I did. I was originally in comp sci, but I did change to IT. There was a college I went to, Marist College at Poughkeepsie, and they had an IT program which is more hands-on into like routers and network design and databases and stuff, and that attracted me more than just direct development. And so I had my degree in IT, but now they both merged into like the DevOps concepts, right? So I can code and I can work on backend systems, and that's where I live. It's sort of a merger of both.
Well, yeah, and again, whether it's computer development, software development, games, or 3D printed resources, same thing, right? We hear me say all the time, like, you have the idea, you have the design, let's print it. Doesn't have to be perfect because it's not going to be perfect the first time you print, or it might be, but you don't know until you print it. So we have to just get it out there and get it done, which is nice because we have printers to print. So, but that's a great way to finish. So I want to say thank you very much. I'm going to bring down the floor. I appreciate it. That was great. Thanks for the slides. Again, blown away with how much attention you're paying already to inclusivity and accessibility. So
We're trying,
it's good.
it's an onion though. You peel off sort of one layer and then there's more to address. Ultimately, we just want everybody to have fun.